How can we overcome the shame of abuse? That's the topic that we're going to discuss today on Flourish-Meant. I'm your host, Tina Yeager, and as you can see, I have two wonderful women with me. One is a longtime friend and someone that I've always esteemed highly. Her name is Eva Marie Everson. She is the founder and CEO of Word Weavers. She is an author, multiple best-selling author. She's also written books that have been affiliated with film, and her co-author, Miriam Feinberg Vamosh, is also an award-winning author, and she is amazing. I have a book that they co-wrote before. It's one of my most treasured gift books that I own. It's about the Holy Land, and it's got rich, deep descriptions and all kinds of details about it. So I encourage you to look for that, as well as their new release, which is, even though it's a novel, it really addresses the deep heart behind what women who are abused now feel and how they have always felt throughout history. I'm excited about getting into this topic today. Welcome, Eva. Would you like to say something to start with?
Yes, I would like to thoroughly introduce my co-author, Miriam Feinberg Vamosh. She is in Haradar, Israel, which is just above Jerusalem. Been a guest in her lovely home and met her lovely family. And we met in 2002 when I was a journalist in Israel, on a journalist tour. Miriam was our interpreter and our guide, and we just became fast friends.
I want to get into some steps that come from the beautifully crafted novel, Ahoti, about how we can overcome the shame of abuse. Because this isn't just a heart-wrenching story of someone who was abused and set aside. There is the coming out of the ashes piece of this story. There's a redemption process, a victorious ending to this story. I haven't gotten there yet. I haven't read it. We don't want to do any spoilers, but I do want you to talk about that for the audience, the listeners who connect with this personally or who may know someone who connects with this. First of all, if someone is steeped in shame because they've been abused, what would you say is the first thing they need to realize to begin the journey of healing? Let me start with Miriam so that she can offer some insight from the Hebrew perspective of healing here.
The first thing she needs to do, besides the obvious in today's world, report to the authorities. In the biblical world, it was her father's responsibility to handle all that. She should find a friend, a companion, a relative, someone in her surroundings, a neighbor who she can call on for support, who will believe her without any doubt and will support her all through the long process. In Tamar's case, it took years before she reached her closure and justice and redemption from that shame. But I would say that's the most important thing, is to tell someone that you trust and love.
Eva, would you also add to that? I know that this is such an important piece, recognizing that you're not the only one this has happened to, even though we have the statistics.
Yeah.
It still feels very isolating when it's
Yes.
happened to you.
Yes, and in Bible times, they wouldn't have had that. And among our Orthodox brethren who keep a very strict hold on their daughters. I mean, there's not the kinds of things there were in the Bible, but they watch their daughters very closely. And they make sure that when they reach 18 and they start to see their potential suitors, that they are virgins. And it's considered quite a shame if something happens, if they have sexual relations before they're married, even with their intended. They hardly touch each other before they're married. And so that there's no way for that shame to come out. As you say, that's the first thing you feel. But among the Orthodox segment of our society, they're only beginning now to know that it's not a shame, it's not their fault, and they should come out and tell what happened.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the most important things is, never mind the statistics, because even though they're there, if you have been assaulted, you don't care about the statistics. it's not just an emotional assault. It is not just a physical assault. It's an emotional, physical, and spiritual assault. Because, and just to be totally blunt and honest, I believe that the relationships between men and women of the physical and sexual nature, are that understanding of who we are with God. So, I mean, because it is so intimate and it is so personal. It is that joining of mind, body, and spirit as one. That's the way it was designed to be. That's the way it's supposed to be. And when somebody rips that away from you as your right to have that in the way it was supposed to be given to you, then it is an assault on mind, body, and spirit. It's not just one thing. And so the first thing is, do not take that shame. Do not. But secondly, tell and then get the help that you need to go to someone like you, Tina, or, any trained professional and say, this happened. And then thirdly, and one of the things that I've said over and over and over is stop seeing yourself as a victim and start seeing yourself as a victor, because life does go on. And life went on for Tamar. We know that life went on for Tamar. The biblical account may shut the door on her walking into Absalom's home, but she did not cease to exist. And so if this story that we find in this ancient document is true, then what we have is a woman who came into her own and became her own voice, and then received her redemption, and went on to live a very lovely life. We can just imagine that she went on to live a lovely life. We hear that scripture over and over that God's mercy is new every morning. Well, the sun does come up every morning, and there's a new light, and there's a new mercy. And we keep our foot one in front of the other. We all experience tragedy. That's not to poo-poo anyone's tragedy. We all experience tragedy, but we put one foot in front of the other, and we choose to delight in God's blessings and what God gave us, and not in what life takes away. That's a choice.
Oh, it's a matter of how we define who we are and what God has for us next. So at the very beginning, there's so much woundedness that you are a victim, and you have to acknowledge that something wrong was done to you at first, obviously, and tell someone. I like that step. That's a very important step, is not to keep it to yourself, because that's the playground of the enemy, the accuser, is when we keep it inside of our own minds and our own hearts and we don't share that story. I love that you're bringing this through fiction so people can access these steps to healing that may not otherwise have been willing to step out and access some of these healing steps, and they can identify with this character's story and begin to find healing in that story. So that's really wonderful. What are some of the pieces that you see as you were crafting this novel as a step from the place of being the wounded victim who is so broken and so mired in shame to redefining herself as a survivor and stepping forward into, this is where I take control of my destiny and I don't remain a victim at the mercy of my circumstances?
What occurs to me first is that she was a knowledgeable woman. She was a learned woman. And in the Bible, there were plenty of learned women, but we don't usually find out about them. We're just not told that. The Bible is the story of the men and the women who supported them at best. So first of all, she was learned in the Bible, in the scripture, they called it in those days, and she was a healer. The scholars have taught, in my research, I came across the idea from very tiny hints in the scripture itself, in our scriptures, that she was a healer. She grew healing herbs and she knew how to apply them. And she also knew a little bit in your field, Tina, that she knew how to do talk therapy. She knew how to do healing by touch. And she knew that all when this happened to her, which is why she was told to go to Amnon. And in the English Bible, it just says make him make him a cake. I think it says cakes or pancakes or griddle cakes or something, all kinds of translations. But we believe, again, from a small hint in the Hebrew word, that this, because Amnon pretended he was sick, that this was a healing piece of food that she prepared for him. And therefore, we think she was already a healer. So she took this knowledge of healing on away with her when she had to flee, and she reestablished her identity not as Tamar. She wouldn't have been allowed to say who she was, because she was being Absalom's full sister. She was also suspected of being in this conspiracy. So she took on another identity, but she kept her profession as a healer. And in this way, she was able to reestablish herself, grow stronger and stronger until she was finally ready to take that final important step.
So what you're saying, if I'm hearing this correctly, is make sure that you take an inventory of what God says about who you are, who you were created to be, what your real gifts are, what your strengths are, and don't let the enemy steal that from you in shame, because that is what the enemy will do. He will attack us in the areas of our gifting, and you beautifully convey that through this story. Eva, would you like to add to how we overcome shame in the steps that we take toward becoming someone who's a survivor, who is victorious, and who is contributing healing as a person who's been broken, but can still heal and still provide?
That's one of the things I love about this story is that she went back to who she was before the assault. She went back to who she was before the rape. So she did not allow herself to settle on, I am a rape victim. She said, this is who I am. This is who I was before. This is who I still am now. And that's what we have to do as women or men who are sexually assaulted or assaulted in any way. We have to go back to who we know we are. So one of the things that I have said before to rape victims when I was working for the DA's office was, tell me more about you. Okay. And so you can say, I have, brown hair and brown eyes, and I play piano, and I took 8 years of dance, and I'm a wife, and I'm a mother, and I'm a this, and I'm a that. And, I was raped, and da, 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 da. See, that's just a tiny portion of who you are. So let's get back to the totality of who you are and stop focusing in on that one thing. And so if we can go back and say, this is who I was before, and this is who I still am. Also, though, there is a new level of compassion. And so, because it does change you. So Tamar would have then held a new level of compassion toward the way she looked at other people, toward the way she looked at other peoples. And we had this one moment, Miriam came up with this. There's a story of the wise woman of Abel. And Miriam said, isn't this interesting? Because this all happened about, like around the same time. And there's a reason why the wise woman of Abel recognized, I believe it was Joab. And it was Joab in the army. And she recognized, so
she said, are you Joab?
Yes. Like, how would you know that? It's not like you had social media in those days, or even newspapers or television,
anything.
How would she have known that he was Joab? So she said, what if that was Tamar? And so, because she then had compassion on these people who were being besieged because of this guy that was hiding up in the city, she took matters into her own hands, which she could not do. She tried, but she could not do during the assault. So she's now starting to become this woman that she was always intended to be.
And that woman is more than she was before the trauma, not less than.
That's right.
And that's an important point that you make in this story, with so many other important pieces. I wish we had time to cover all of them. But I do want to talk about the difficult process of letting go of that bitterness. And that's part of what tethers us to that deep shame, that deep rooted woundedness as part of our identity. Can you talk about what that was like for you going through this process of writing the novel, talking about the overcoming of the bitterness and resentment? Because as readers, we're going to identify with her and become resentful, both of her prisoner, Absalom, and of her predator, Amnon.
And also with her father,
Yes, her father who did
which
not
Miriam and I
protect her.
talked about quite a bit. I'd like for
Great
Miriam
deal.
to address that.
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
I was very angry at David. Very. And Eva would have to tone me down sometimes because we know that David is God's chosen and David is the ancestor of the Messiah, and all the other the Psalms that he wrote where he showed such intense sorrow. Every human emotion in the book he showed in the Psalms, but he failed Tamar in such a basic way that I could not let go of this. And if I was in therapy with you, you would say, well, how were things with your own father? And I would say, they were fine. My father was a supporter and my mother of everything I ever said or did. But I felt that deeply for Tamar. And as our story continues, we actually show that she never let go of the anger completely. And that's the biggest spoiler of all. We won't say how that turned out. But I don't believe, I haven't had this experience personally, but from things that I've heard and what's going on now in my country, I don't believe you ever let it go completely. Maybe you and Eva can tell me otherwise, which would be a great source of hope for me. But I think that somewhere in your heart, you always retain it.
I don't think you let go of any trauma completely, because you can choose to allow it to shape you into a better person or into a lesser person. So, we know so many times that people who have experienced one trauma or another, it leads to something even greater. So I'm going to use this as an example because I was just reading about it just recently. The two men who formed AA, like the Victim Witness Assistance Program, came to this country and in courts everywhere back in the 80s, which is when I was a part of it, uh, because someone was abused. They were a crime victim, and there was no one there for them. And they said, this has to stop. Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, where did that start? It was a woman whose son was killed by a drunk driver, or her daughter, I think it might have been. Um, the Rape Crisis Center, where did that begin? It began with someone who was raped, and there was no one there for them. So take the trauma and allow it to make you into an angry, bitter person, or you can say, what can I do now to help? What can I do now to better this society? And again, that's what we see Tamar doing through this story. She just continues to bless and grow, bless and grow. In her own growth, she blesses. But do you ever let go of it entirely? I don't think so, and nor do I think that you should, because not letting go of it allows you to then do something with it. So if, like, for example, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, if the woman whose child was killed had said, oh, well, right, I'm just going to forget about it, well, then we wouldn't have met, and we wouldn't have made the steps that we've made. Anyone who is in grief counseling groups, etc., that came about because somebody was grieving. And the grief and the missing continues. But we grow outside of it, and we grow in spite of it. And that's exactly what Tamar did, according to this document and according to our book.
And you do talk about this in terms of time, that this doesn't all happen at once. And that's very important to recognize because, as you say, like at the beginning of the trauma, and like you said, you're not going to let go of the trauma, but you do want to let go of the bitterness and the resentment, which toxifies your own soul. You want to be able to trust God gradually, layer by layer, and put all of those issues that you need justice for in the hands of the one that can get justice. If you hold on to that bitterness and resentment, it will poison you. And we need to make sure that that is known as a gradual, step-by-step process, not an overnight thing. So there is hope for the person who begins in that place of very justified anger, resentment, hurt, woundedness, that eventually you can begin to experience greater and greater peace in your heart and your spirit. And I love that your story unfolds with that hope for the victim. How can people get a copy of Ehoti and continue to follow you online?
And it's Eva Marie Everson, author.com. And Ahoti is sold in brick and mortar stores, but also any online store, barnesandnoble.com, amazon.com, christianbook.com, booksamillion.com, walmart.com, all of the .coms. I do believe I checked Target, and I don't believe it's in Target. That's okay. But just, check. If you go to a brick and mortar store and they don't have it, ask for it. They will order it for you. And that, of course, is good news for us. Also, let me encourage you, if you go to your local library and they don't have it, ask for it. They will order it for you.
My website is my name. It's www.miriamfeinbergvamosh.com. And I have a blog which deals with a lot of different things having to do with the land of Israel and the Bible. And every once in a while I post on the blog, and they're all in there. And when I was first doing my research for Tamar, for the book, before we even started it, I wrote a blog on several of the characters in the story, about Tamar, of course, and then about her, apparently, her grandmother. Her grandmother appears not in the Bible, but it appears in among the rabbinic sages when they sat around one day in the shade and they said, "None of these men have mothers?" Well, they have mothers, but what are their name? Like David in the Psalm says, "My mother and my father. I am a stranger to my mother and my father," I think. I might be misquoted. "And my brothers." So they decided to give names to some of the biblical characters, and they gave a name to Tamar's grandmother, David's mother. And when I discovered that, I looked up all the information about her, and I wrote a blog about it so that I could prepare myself that way for inserting her into the book.
Thank you so much for all of that wonderful insight and those bonus features that you can find. I hope that all of you listening have enjoyed this amazing conversation with these two authors who brought tremendous expertise from their rich backgrounds to bring you a story that can help you on your journey of healing or equip you to lead someone else on that journey as well. And of course, I also hope that you will hit subscribe and come back for the next episode of Flourishment.